The slam of the bedroom door echoed through our house like thunder. I stood there in the living room, stunned silent by her reaction to what had been a simple comment about dinner plans. 2 hours of piercing silence followed. No conversation, no eye contact, just the weight of another session of her infamous silent treatment crushing down on my shoulders. This was the third time this month. I'd say something she didn't like, and suddenly she'd transform into a ghost, physically present but completely unreachable. In the past, I would have followed her around the house, apologizing profusely for whatever perceived slight had triggered her shutdown. I would have begged for forgiveness, promised to do better, anything to end the excruciating silence. But tonight was different. As I watched her move through our kitchen, deliberately ignoring my existence, something inside me hardened. 6 years of marriage, and this had become her weapon of choice. The silent treatment, a form of emotional manipulation that had effectively kept me walking on eggshells around my own wife. I remembered how it started, small disagreements where she'd go quiet for an hour. Then it escalated to full days of silence. I'd grown accustomed to being the one who always broke first, who always crawled back seeking reconciliation. The pattern was crystal clear now. She wielded silence as control, and I surrendered my dignity every single time. My phone buzzed. A message from my brother asking if I wanted to grab drinks. Normally, I would have declined, afraid to leave the house during one of her silent episodes. But tonight, I typed back, "Meet you in 30. When I grabbed my jacket, she finally acknowledged me with a cold glare from the kitchen counter. "Where are you going?" The first words she'd spoken in hours. "Out." I replied simply, maintaining eye contact. "Don't wait up." The look of confusion that flashed across her face was new. This wasn't the script she was used to. I should have been apologizing by now, trying to coax her into forgiveness. "You're leaving? Now, when we're in the middle of something." Her voice had an edge of panic. "We're not in the middle of anything," I said calmly. "You decided the conversation was over when you slammed the door. I'm respecting your choice to not communicate." As I walked toward the door, she called out, "So you're just going to walk away from our problems?" I turned, feeling strangely powerful in my newfound clarity. "I'm not walking away from our problems. I'm walking away from your game. When you're ready to talk like adults instead of punishing me with silence, I'll be here. But until then, I'm done chasing someone who keeps running." The door closed behind me with a quiet click. No slam, no dramatic exit. Just a man who finally understood that respect begins with self-respect. That night marked the beginning of my new approach. Her silent treatment was about to meet its match, not in more silence, but in a man who finally found his voice. The bar was packed when I arrived. My brother waved from a corner booth, looking surprised I'd actually shown up. We hadn't spent a weeknight together in months, maybe years. My evenings were usually spent trying to decode my wife's moods or making amends for imaginary offenses. "Didn't expect to see you on a Tuesday," he said, sliding a beer across the table. "Everything okay at home?" "Just needed some air," I replied, not ready to unpack everything. We spent the next few hours catching up, laughing about old stories, and discussing his new business venture. For the first time in ages, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes, wasn't wondering if she had finally decided to forgive me. When I returned home just before midnight, the house was dark except for the faint blue glow of the TV in our bedroom. She was still awake, scrolling through her phone, and glanced up with obvious surprise when I entered. "You've been gone for hours," she said, her tone carefully balanced between accusation and forced casualness. "Had a great time with my brother," I responded, maintaining the same neutral tone I'd left with. No apologies, no detailed explanations. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run, another activity I gradually abandoned to accommodate her moods. When I returned, she was in the kitchen, making coffee with deliberate movements. "We need to talk about last night," she began, her voice already taking on that wounded quality I knew so well. "What about it?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. "You just left in the middle of our fight." "There was no fight," I corrected her. "You were giving me the silent treatment. I decided to use that time productively." Her face flushed. "So you're saying our marriage problems aren't worth your time?" "No, I'm saying silent treatment isn't communication. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. But I won't chase you anymore when you shut down." The week continued with this new dynamic. She'd attempt to freeze me out, and instead of begging for attention, I'd focus on myself. I reconnected with friends, joined a weekend hiking group, and started a home office renovation project I'd been putting off. Her tactics escalated predictably. The silent treatment turned into pointed sighs and dramatic exits. When those failed to elicit my usual desperate reconciliation attempts, she tried more direct provocations. "You don't even care if our marriage falls apart," she accused one evening as I was heading out to a photography class I'd enrolled in. "I care deeply about our marriage," I replied, pausing at the door. "That's why I'm no longer participating in destructive patterns. We deserve better than that." The confusion on her face was almost comical. This wasn't how her playbook was supposed to unfold. By now, I should have been promising changes, begging for forgiveness, canceling my plans to prove my devotion. Instead, I continued living my life. Not to spite her, but because I finally understood that surrendering my identity wasn't the price of relationship peace. 2 weeks into my new approach, something shifted. I came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, unusually subdued. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice missing its usual sharp edge. I sat down across from her, maintaining eye contact. "Always. You've changed," she said simply. "I've stopped participating in unhealthy patterns," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." For the first time in years, I saw something flicker in her eyes that wasn't manipulation or anger. It was uncertainty, maybe even respect. That conversation at the kitchen table should have marked a turning point. For a moment, it seemed like she might be ready to acknowledge the toxicity of her silent treatment tactics. But old habits die hard. 3 days later, when I declined to attend her office party due to a prior commitment with my dad, the Cold War resumed. This time, however, she added a new dimension to her arsenal, involving others in her campaign. "Your wife called me today," my mom said when I phoned her that evening. "She seemed upset that you're not going to her work event. Is everything okay between you two?" I sighed, recognizing the triangulation tactic immediately. "We're working through some communication issues, Mom. Nothing to worry about." Later that week, I discovered text messages she'd sent to my closest friend, suggesting I was having some kind of midlife crisis. According to her, I was suddenly selfish and distant, prioritizing my new hobbies over our marriage. Rather than confronting her about this immediately, I decided to observe. What I saw was revealing. As her usual methods of control failed, she was escalating, trying to create external pressure that would force me back into my old submissive patterns. I maintained my course, not out of stubbornness, but from the growing certainty that our relationship couldn't heal until these manipulative patterns were addressed. I continued living my life, working, exercising, socializing, pursuing interests, while remaining open to genuine communication whenever she was ready. Then came an unexpected discovery. While paying our bills online, I noticed multiple charges from a therapy service I didn't recognize. Apparently, she had been seeing a counselor for the past month without mentioning it to me. That same evening, I found her at the dining table, staring at her laptop with unusual intensity. When she didn't notice my presence, I cleared my throat. "Working late?" I asked casually. She slammed the laptop shut with surprising force. "Just checking emails." Something in her reaction seemed off. The next morning, I overheard her on the phone in hushed, urgent tones. "They can't do this now. I've been there 5 years. Yes, I understand market conditions, but..." The pieces suddenly clicked. While I've been focused on our relationship dynamics, she'd been dealing with workplace issues. Not that this excused her behavior, but it added crucial context. That evening, I decided to approach directly. "Is everything okay at work?" I asked as we moved around each other in the kitchen, maintaining our practiced emotional distance. Her eyes flashed with suspicion. "Why do you ask?" "Because we're still married, and I still care about what happens in your life." Something in my tone must have reached her. Her shoulders sagged slightly, the rigid anger seeming to drain away momentarily. "They're downsizing the department," she admitted. "I might lose my position. I've been managing the team for 5 years, and suddenly I have to re-interview for my own job." I nodded, letting the information settle between us. "That's rough. I wish you'd told me." "You've been so busy with your new life," she said, bitterness edging back into her voice. "That's not fair," I replied calmly. "I've been right here, ready to talk whenever you are." But talking isn't the same as accepting manipulation. She flinched at the word manipulation, but didn't deny it. "I found the therapy charges," I continued. "I think it's great you're talking to someone. For a moment, vulnerability showed through her defenses. It was her idea that I tell you about the job situation. She says I use silence to avoid feeling vulnerable. The admission hung in the air between us, the first real truth we'd shared in months. Would you consider going to therapy together? I asked. Before we make any permanent decisions about our future? She looked directly at me, really seeing me for the first time in ages. You'd still want to try? Even after everything. I want us to be healthy, together or apart. But yes, I'd prefer together. The therapy office had soothing blue walls and comfortable seating arranged to encourage conversation. We sat across from each other, not quite making eye contact as the therapist introduced herself and explained how these sessions would work. Before we begin, the therapist said, I want to establish that this is a safe space for honest communication. Nothing productive comes from holding back the truth. For the first 30 minutes, we covered the basics of our relationship, how we met, the early years when things began to change. The conversation remained superficial until the therapist asked about our current communication patterns. She uses silence as a weapon, I stated directly, breaking our unspoken agreement to keep our deepest issues private. Any disagreement ends with days of silent treatment, followed by me eventually apologizing even when I've done nothing wrong. The therapist turned to her. Would you say that's accurate? She stared at her hands for a long moment. I withdraw when I feel unheard, she finally said, her voice barely audible. Unheard or challenged. I asked, not unkindly. There's a difference between not listening and not agreeing. The therapist nodded. This is good. Let's explore that distinction. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. As the session progressed, layers of defensive behaviors were identified and examined. Her silent treatments weren't just manipulation tactics. They were her refuge when feeling vulnerable or threatened. My historical pattern of capitulation had reinforced the behavior, creating our toxic cycle. When you go silent, I explained, I feel punished for having normal human disagreements. It makes me afraid to express any opinion that might differ from yours. And when you've been doing all these new activities, she countered, I feel like you're building a life without me. Like you're preparing to leave. The therapist interjected. It sounds like you're both operating from fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of control. Fear of vulnerability. By the end of the session, we had homework. She would practice direct communication instead of withdrawal, and I would ensure I was truly listening before asserting my position. In the car afterward, the silence between us felt different, contemplative rather than punitive. That was harder than I expected, she finally said as we pulled into our driveway. But necessary, I added. Over the next 2 weeks, we attended 3 more sessions, each digging deeper into our patterns. Between appointments, we practiced our new communication skills with mixed results. Old habits resurfaced during stress, particularly after she received confirmation that her position was indeed being eliminated. The night she got the news, I found her sitting in darkness on our back porch. I'm not giving you the silent treatment, she said before I could speak. I just needed space to think. I sat beside her. That's fair. Do you want to be alone? Or would you like company while you think? Company, she whispered. We sat together under the stars, not talking but present. Progress. The following week brought a critical turning point. During dinner, we disagreed about a financial decision. I watched her body language shift, the telltale signs of her preparing to shut down emotionally. But then something remarkable happened. I'm feeling defensive, she stated, using the communication template our therapist had suggested. I need a few minutes to collect my thoughts before we continue this conversation. She went to the bedroom, but returned 15 minutes later, ready to talk. No silent treatment, no manipulation, just an adult requesting space and then re-engaging. That night, as we prepared for bed, I made a decision. I think we should consider a trial separation, I said quietly. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. What? Why now? I thought things were getting better. They are, I assured her. And that's exactly why. We're learning new patterns, but we're doing it within the same environment where the old patterns were established. I think we need space to practice these skills independently. You're leaving me, she said, tears forming. I'm suggesting we take a strategic pause to strengthen ourselves individually. 2 weeks. Separate spaces, but continued therapy. Then we reassess. Though she initially resisted, we eventually agreed. 2 weeks apart to reflect on what we truly wanted from our marriage. As I packed a bag from my brother's guest room, she stood in the doorway. "This isn't what I expected when I started therapy," she admitted. "Real growth rarely follows our expected path," I replied. "But that doesn't mean we're headed toward a dead end." Living at my brother's house was a strange experience. The first night felt like liberation. No walking on eggshells, no interpreting passive-aggressive signals, no bracing for the next silent episode. I slept soundly for the first time in months. By the third day, however, the novelty had worn off. I missed our home, our routines, even our conflicts. This wasn't about running from problems. It was about gaining perspective to solve them. "How's the marriage sabbatical going?" my brother asked over breakfast. "It's not a sabbatical," I corrected him. "And it's necessary." He shrugged. "Well, whatever it is, you seem different. More like your old self." That observation stayed with me throughout the day. Had I really changed so much during my marriage? Had I gradually surrendered pieces of myself to avoid her disapproval? Our therapist had agreed to see us individually during our separation. During my session, she helped me articulate what I wanted from our relationship moving forward. "I want mutual respect," I explained. "Communication that doesn't involve manipulation. The ability to disagree without punishment." "Do you believe that's possible with her?" the therapist asked. "I believe people can change when they understand their patterns and want something better." "And do you think she wants something better?" The question lingered. Did she? Or was she simply trying to preserve the status quo, where her emotional needs took precedence over everything? Later that week, I drove past our house and noticed her car was gone. Fighting the urge to use the tracking app we'd installed on each other's phones years ago, I continued to my destination, a nearby park where I'd been running most mornings. On day 10 of our separation, a text appeared. "Can I drop something off at your brother's?" I replied with a simple yes, curious but cautious. That evening, she arrived with a sealed envelope. "I wrote this," she said, extending it toward me. "My therapist suggested it might be helpful." She looked different somehow, more grounded, less frantic energy. Her hair was shorter, her clothing style subtly changed. Like me, she seemed to be rediscovering herself in our time apart. "Would you like to come in?" I offered. She shook her head. "I think we should stick to the agreement." For more days. After she left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a 5-page letter, handwritten on stationery I didn't recognize. It began with a timeline of her own family history. Parents who used silence and withdrawal as standard operating procedure. A childhood where emotional manipulation was the primary language of love. "I'm not offering this as an excuse," she wrote, "but as context. I never realized that what felt like self-protection to me was actually a weapon that damaged us both." The letter continued with a detailed accounting of incidents where she'd used silent treatment deliberately to control outcomes, alongside genuine moments of vulnerability where silence had been her only perceived refuge. "The difference between us," she concluded, "is that you were willing to walk away from a toxic pattern, while I've been clinging to it like a life raft. I don't know if we can repair what's broken between us, but I do know that I want to become someone who doesn't need manipulation to feel secure." I read the letter 3 times that night, emotions cycling between vindication, grief, and cautious hope. She hadn't asked for reconciliation or forgiveness, just understanding. There was dignity in that restraint. The remaining days of our separation passed with minimal contact. We exchanged brief texts about practical matters, but honored the space we'd agreed to maintain. On the final evening before our scheduled reunion and decision talk, I sat on my brother's back porch, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a man slowly surrendering his identity to keep peace in a dysfunctional marriage. Now I was someone who understood his own boundaries and was willing to defend them, even at the cost of comfort. Whatever happened tomorrow, I wouldn't return to silent capitulation. That version of me was gone for good. My phone vibrated with a text from her. "I'm nervous about tomorrow." I replied honestly, "Me too." 3 dots appeared as she typed, disappeared, then reappeared. "Finally, whatever we decide, thank you for forcing us to face this. It would have been easier to keep pretending." That night, I packed my bag and prepared to return home, not certain we would reconcile, but certain that we would at least speak our truths. After years of silence, that felt like a victory in itself. The morning of our reunion dawned clear and bright. I arrived at our house precisely at the agreed time, 10 o'clock. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for my approach. "Welcome home," she said softly, though we both knew my presence didn't yet guarantee I was staying. The house looked different. She'd rearranged furniture, replaced some artwork, created a space that felt refreshed rather than haunted by old patterns. In the living room, 2 chairs faced each other with a small table between them, an intentional setup for conversation. "Coffee," she offered. "Please." As she moved to the kitchen, I noticed how deliberately she was communicating, verbalizing offers instead of making assumptions, maintaining appropriate eye contact, respecting physical boundaries. The therapy was evident in these small but significant shifts. When we settled into the chairs, an awkward moment stretched between us. Who would begin? What words could possibly address the complex landscape we now inhabited? "I've been thinking about silence," she finally said, surprising me. "About how my family used it as currency. Approval was expressed through presence, disapproval through absence. I learned early that withdrawing was the most powerful move in any emotional exchange." I nodded, allowing her to continue without interruption. "The past 2 weeks have been illuminating," she continued. "Living alone, I realized how often I use silence not just against you, but against myself. To avoid feelings I don't want to face. To pretend certain truths don't exist." She set her coffee down, hands slightly trembling. "I've been using the same tactics at work, with friends. It's not just our marriage, it's how I navigate the entire world. And it's cost me more than I realized." "Have you reached any conclusions?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to change. Not just for us, though that matters tremendously, but for myself. This isn't who I want to be anymore." I took a deep breath. "I believe you want to change. The question is whether we should continue this journey together or separately." Her expression remained composed, though I could see the effort it required. "What do you want?" 2 months ago, this would have been a trap, a question designed to test my loyalty, with silent punishment awaiting the wrong answer. Now it felt genuinely open-ended. "I want a partnership based on mutual respect and honest communication," I said. "I want disagreement without fear, vulnerability without exploitation, growth without manipulation." "Can you see that happening with me?" she asked quietly. "I believe it's possible," I replied carefully. "But it would require consistent effort from both of us, professional support, and clear boundaries." She nodded, seeming to have expected this answer. "I've drafted something," she said, reaching for a folder on the table. "Not an ultimatum, but a framework for moving forward, if that's what we choose." Inside were typed pages outlining a relationship reset, continued therapy, both individual and as a couple, communication protocols for disagreements, regular check-ins about personal and shared goals, a mutual commitment to individual interests and friendships outside the marriage. "The therapist helped me organize my thoughts," she explained. "But these are my words, my commitments." I read carefully, impressed by the thoroughness and self-awareness reflected in the document. This wasn't a desperate plea or a temporary concession. It was a blueprint for sustainable change. "I'd like to add something," I said when I finished reading. "A 3-month review period. If either of us feels we're slipping back into old patterns, we revisit the separation option without blame." She didn't flinch at the suggestion. "That's fair. I'd add only that we agree to state it directly, not withdraw or hint at discontent." Agreed. We spent the next hour refining the document, then signed it, not as a legal contract, but as a symbol of intent. Whatever came next, we would face it with clarity and purpose. That evening, as we prepared dinner together in a kitchen that now felt like shared neutral territory, she paused mid-task. "I've never properly apologized," she said, "for the years of silent treatment, for the manipulation. I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I accept your apology." Later, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, side by side but not touching, respecting the delicate new boundaries between us, she asked, "Do you think we can really change patterns that run this deep?" I considered the question carefully. I think it's like learning any difficult skill. At first, it requires constant attention and correction. Eventually, with practice, it becomes second nature. She nodded. "The silence between us now feels different, peaceful rather than punitive." "That's the difference," I agreed. "Silence as presence rather than absence, as connection rather than weapon." As darkness settled around us, we sat together in that new quality of silence, Two people choosing their path forward with clear eyes and honest hearts. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the story we might create together. Not because I'd surrendered to her will, but because I'd finally stood firm in my own truth. Sometimes, it takes showing someone how quiet single life can be to rediscover how beautiful shared silence can become.